Hello, thank you for joining this webinar today. My name is Emily and I'm one of the product developers here at ALPS. And today we're going to be looking at how you can import data to help your teachers create their judgment grades. So this webinar is really designed for data managers or anyone importing data. And what we want from today is so that you're confident submitting data and that you also know where there are resources and help available should you have sort of any questions while you're going through that process. Should also say that we have some education webinars running alongside these data entry webinars. So if you are looking for any guidance on using Connect Interactive, and sort of the features that we have available, which may sort of help and assist when thinking about these judgment grades, then those are available to book from our website, just as you have done today, and I'll be going through that as well. Okay, so in this sort of unprecedented situation, we have opened up Connect Interactive to all of our users. So if you find that you don't have access or you would like to sort of get access to Connect Interactive, then there is a register link on our website. That's just alps.education. But today I'm going to sort of really start from the assumption that you are activated, you've been added to the account, and that you have a login, and you're sort of ready to start submitting your data really. Okay, so once you log in from our website, you will see this screen. This is our Connect homepage, and the interactive analysis box here. If you have no data in the system whatsoever, that may well be grey, but don't worry, as soon as we've got some monitoring data in, that will sort of become orange and clickable, and your colleagues will be able to begin using Connect Interactive. So today we're really going to focus on this data management area. We're going to run through the submitting data, which is accessed from here, and we're going to run through manage users and settings. And actually, the other thing that I should mention before we do get going is if you click on this link for guidance and support for your judgment grades, you will get to this page of our website. So we have sort of collated all of our support and resources for sort of assessing and submitting the judgment grades. So step one here, this is really what we're going to be focusing on today. And it's the Connect data aspect of it, the submitting data. So we have some sort of longer webinars here. Today I'm really going to go through sort of the minimum that you need in order to get your student data and some monitoring data in. But if you do want a little bit more information, then we do have these webinars here that go into a little bit more detail. They're a little bit longer. And we've got our full PDF guide as well, if you do prefer to kind of read through things or be able to print something off. Step two, this is sort of using the tools to help you with your judgment grades. And the education webinars are available to book from here. And we also have some short videos done by our education teams. So we have education webinars running through April about how to use Connect Interactive to determine your judgment grades. But first, we are going to need some data. So let's get going. If I click on Manage Data here, I'm taken through to Connect Data. Now, this first screen that I see is our cohort screen. And this really gives me just an overview of the data that I have in the system about my students. So Connect data is really sort of fundamentally split into this sort of idea of cohorts and the student data that you can submit at any time of year, probably at the beginning of the year if you're using us for target setting. But really you can submit and amend this at any time of year. And then we have our grade points, and this is the grades data. And this will be sort of submitted periodically through the year if you're doing monitoring. And they're all linked together by the student ID. And that's one of the really fundamental things about the system. As long as you have sort of the one consistent student ID, that's really going to help you out. Okay, so I can see here that I have my year 12 students submitted. I can see that sort of pretty nice complete data there. My year 11, I only have the students submitted, sort of no prior attainment yet. And I don't have my year 13s submitted yet. Now that's going to be pretty important for the judgment grades, making sure I've got my year 13 submitted. And that's what I'm going to be doing today, just showing you how to do that. But I should say this webinar is equally applicable for Key Stage 4 and Key Stage 5. I will show you kind of the points at which the process would differ. But it's very, very similar. And as you'll see, it's hopefully quite an easy process. It's all done through a series of data import wizards. So to start adding my year 13, I just click on Add Year Group. And students on roll in 1920, that's great. And now if I select my year group, year 13, we're going to import these students. When I click on Next, I get to a Prepare Data step. And now if you do use SIMS, then we do have Key Stage 5 and Key Stage 4 report definitions, which will just help you extract that data. If you don't use SIMS, then don't worry. Essentially what you need to do is be able to get your data from your MIS into an Excel spreadsheet. And we do have an example Excel spreadsheet that you can download here. Or you can sort of get this, this little preview here. Will show you what you need. Now, because we're wanting to kind of import the minimum of data, realistically, you don't actually need the date of birth, tutor group, ethnicity, disadvantage. And at this point, you're probably not going to be interested in importing custom columns. Custom columns are just your own sort of your own filters, really. It's student level data, so it could be new to 6th, for example, a yes or no. So it's just categorical data that would allow your colleagues to filter and sort their analysis based on that. So really, if we're thinking about kind of the minimum of data that we need, the quickest import that we can do, what you really need for this is your student ID, their surname and their forename. I do have average GCSE score here. And if you don't use SIMS, then I would recommend getting your average GCSE scores calculated. And we will run through that in the next step, and you'll be able to just import them here. Today I'm going to show you what the sort of average GCSE score import from SIMS would look like. So I won't be doing that in this step. Yeah, if you have those GCSE scores and they sort of align with our methodology, then you can absolutely submit them now. So if I click on Next, I can import my data here. Now I have used our one of our report definitions, and so this is the sort of output that I get from SIMS. although I have added this prior attainment score column here. So what I'm going to do is I will just do Control A and Control C to select and copy. And switching back to Connect Data here, I can just do Control V and it will paste in my data. So clicking on Next, I have my column mapping here. So this is essentially, because you can import any spreadsheet that you like in any format that you like with any header names that you like, now we just use this column mapping step to tell the software which column is which data it needs to look at. So for SIMS users, I would recommend using the admission number, particularly if you want to use our average GCSE score calculator that links into SIMS. That does work entirely from the admission number. So if you do choose to use a different student ID, then you're just going to create a little bit more work for yourself further down the line. If you don't use SIMS, feel free to use sort of anything that is helpful for you, whether that's, you know, the UPN or a candidate number. Now for Key Stage 4, UPN is really crucial because it's going to be what helps you to link in their prior attainment. But for Key Stage 5, this import that I'm doing, I can just skip UPN. Surname and forename it has recognized, so that's great. That has mapped those. If I scroll along, my SIMS export has actually picked up 3 different measures of disadvantage. Now FSM Ever 6 is the one that our clients would generally use, particularly at Key Stage 4. But you know, if we're thinking about the data that we absolutely need, I actually don't need any of these. If you have used SIMS and it's there, you know, you could map it. That would be absolutely fine. It would allow your colleagues to get a bit more from the analysis, but equally, don't worry about it too much. You can actually just skip all of these columns. The year we already defined in our first step, so I can skip this. Reg has been recognized as tutor group. Gender and date of birth have been recognized, as has ethnicity. And prior attainment score, I am going to skip for the purposes of this webinar, just so that I can show you that import later. So if I click next, then we have a few errors. Missing values, frankly, at this point, I wouldn't worry about it too much. But if you do want to put in values there, then you can do so. Critical errors, compared to non-critical errors, these are going to be what stops you from being able to click on next. So I can remove these remaining values from import, or I can resolve them, but I will need to do something before I can actually click next and sort of progress with the import. So if I click on remove remaining values from import, this essentially just turns them into missing values. So it's not really a problem to do that. These students just won't have, so these 3 students just won't have an entry in the ethnicity cell. So now that those are resolved, I can click on next. And here we have our confirm step with a little summary of our data. And you can see here the missing ethnicity and the missing tutor group entries. So if I click on finish, that is my sort of my student information, my basic student information imported. If you wanted to have a bit of a closer look at that, then you can click on year 13 and it will take you to the students page. And now we have our prior attainment. Now this, I will just spend a little bit more time on because it is sort of so fundamental to your ALPS analysis. Now for Key Stage 5, for England, it's a little bit complicated. So if you're wanting to put in your end of year 2019 results, sort of to do a little bit of comparison, you know, what your students achieved at the end of last year and how your students are doing this year in comparison, you're going to need scores between 8 and 1 for average GCSE scores. So that was using sort of the, you know, the A star to G, 8 to 1 points. And for any reformed grades, we were using sort of the DFE transitional points to go back to an 8 to 1 scale. For in-year monitoring, we had to sort of switch at some point to kind of recognize that at this point, most students have 9 to 1, so it's starting to make sense to use a 9 to 1 scale. So now you leave sort of the reformed 9 to 1 scores and use those, but any A star to G scores, you now again need to use the DFE transitional points. And so an A star, for example, becomes an 8.5 for in-year monitoring for 1920. And I'll show you where you can get a bit more guidance on that and sort of see it written down and have a read through for yourself. For Wales, for end of year and monitoring, we are still using the 8 to 1 scores for both, so that's slightly easier. For Key Stage 4 England, you can import your Key to Success file that you download from the DFE. If you get that in a CSV format, then you can import that straight in. As long as you map those UPNs in that first step when you're importing your student information, then that will match up and it will calculate it all for you, and that's by far the easiest way to do it. And for Key Stage 4 in Wales, we use the Year 8 Welsh National Test scores. So we need the standardized scores for these, and from the prior attainment import that I'm about to show you, there is a template that you can download and populate, and then again, it will calculate it for you. If you are an international school, then I would advise that you just sort of get in touch with us just to clarify which is going to be best for you and how your account has been set up. So if I click on Add Data to launch my prior attainment wizard, I get a little summary. And I have the option for Key Stage 5 to either use the ALPS calculator or to use my own GCSE scores. Now, if you want some more guidance on this, and I would recommend just having a quick look because the prior attainment is so fundamental, if you click on the Help button in the bottom left, this allows you to search our knowledge base. So if you search for average GCSE, for example, and here we have an average GCSE score calculation for data managers. If you open that up, it will open, and this is one of our knowledge base articles. And this will allow you to go through. We also have one for monitoring for England, and we also have an article on using the GCSE score calculator. And this webinar is also available from that initial sort of judgment, grade judgment page that I showed to you. So if I'm using my own GCSE scores and I click on Next, I again get a little bit of assistance, the student ID and the average GCSE score. And this is where, you know, you need to just start being really careful about the ID that you used, as that is the only thing that the software will actually use to match the data. So the SIMS admission number, for example, just make sure that you do, if you have leading zeros on your SIMS admission number, do make sure that you maintain those. If you've used our ALPS calculator, click on Next. There's an option to download the calculator and sort of an additional support. Now, I've actually sort of pulled out this data earlier today. So I have my XML file from the calculator. So I am just going to drag and drop this in. And if I click on Next, so what the calculator does is as if you're working on a local SIMS, then the calculator, it's a little bit of software that you download, so you may need IT to assist you with that. But it will talk to SIMS, it will extract the data, and it will actually extract, I believe, up to about 7 years of data by default. So it may take a while. The files are often quite large, so you can see it took just a little bit of time to identify which of my 90 students based on the student ID. And here I've got their GCSE scores. And just to show you with all the data that sort of it pulls out, we have our 710 import rows that weren't matched. Okay, so if I click on finish here, now if you do need any assistance with the either the GCSE score calculator or you know, calculating your scores yourself, then if you click on the help button, there is also a contact us, and that will give you this form which allows you to get in touch with our support team, and they will be able to assist you with sort of any of your data entry queries. Now, and one of the sort of common reasons why the GCSE calculator may not work is if you are using a hosted SIMS, then you're, or if you have a lot of external students, then it does just make it sort of slightly more complex. But this article should cover that for you. Okay. So now I have the prior attainment imported for my 90 students. And you can see here, this column is now populated. So that's great. We've got our kind of basic fundamental student data in. Now, this may be applicable to some of you. It may not be applicable to all, but because of how your teachers are going to need to access Connect Interactive and the information in Connect Interactive, we are recommending adding teaching data, as it's likely they're going to want to look at it kind of class by class. And teaching data will allow you to import your student IDs, the subjects they're studying, the classes that they're in, and it does also allow you to import teacher names if you want to, but you don't have to. So again, if I click on the Add Data in Teaching Data here, then I get to this Prepare Data step. Again, we have our SIMS report definition, or we have our guidance here on sort of submitting your or creating your own import file. And again, with that student ID, subject and teaching set as sort of the really essential information there. Okay, so I have my my teaching sets here, and this again, this is a output from our SIMS report definition. And you can see it has quite a lot of sort of extra information in here, when really all we need is the admission number, the subject, and the class. So I'm going to use Control-A and Control-C to highlight everything and copy. And coming back to Connect Data, if I click on Next, I get to this Import Data step again. Control-V to paste that in. Click on Next, and I'm back to this column mapping. Now at this point, there are a lot of columns that you can skip. We had sort of all of that extra data in the Excel file. So for UPN, I'm going to skip this. Surname and forename, you can actually skip for this as well because we had imported it in our student data import. So all of that will be pulled through just based on the ID. Year 13 I can skip. It's already recognized my exam type. This, again, it's not strictly speaking necessary, but it may help you in the next step, which is mapping your subjects. Class is unmapped, so I'm going to click on Map and select Teaching Set from the drop-down here. Teacher, it has recognized, so I'm going to leave that. And start date and end date, I can just skip. They're just from the report definition. So if I click on Next, it's going to bring me to my subject mapping. So this is essentially where you have to tell the software, as you did with your column mappings, you have to now tell the software which of your subjects relates to which ALPS subject. So I've only got 4 here, just sort of for the purposes of showing you this, so you weren't watching me map a long list of subjects. But we have all of the ALPS subjects in this list, so it's quite long, but you can click to filter down, and now it will just show us A levels. So if I search for biology, I can click this one, A-level biology, reasonably easy. And if I search for geography, we can map this. Again, searching for history and maths. Now, when I next come to map my subjects, as long as I have the same exam type and the same subject name, the software will now actually recognize this. So if I, for example, imported some data and I had A-level biology in it, it would recognize it as A-level biology. And that's one of the things that can be so helpful in terms of exam type. Because if, for example, I had biology, but in one import I wanted to map it to A-level, and in another I wanted to map biology to GCSE, I could specify that using exam type. So that's really helpful just to help yourself in the future, really, so that it will use both the exam type and the subject to know which ALPS subject it needs to be. So if I click on Next, now I have some duplicates for geography. This is sort of another fundamental of the system, really. When it comes to teaching sets, you can't have the same student subject twice. So geography, for example, some of my students are taught in 2 teaching sets, but unfortunately, we can only actually have them specified in 1 teaching set in the system. And that is just because of sort of how it links to all the information together with the student ID and sort of having unique values for everything. So in order to resolve this, I can choose which of my teaching sets I want to keep. So I've removed this one, and now the teaching set here, that is going to be the one that is associated with this student's geography. I'm going to remove this one and remove this one, and now I can click Next. I have some missing values for teacher, but that's absolutely not a problem. As I said, teacher is not an essential field. Some people prefer not to import it, and that's absolutely fine. That won't make a difference to the sort of the end analysis too much. So I'm going to click on Next, and we can see those missing values here on this little summary that we've got. So if I click on Finish now, it will show me on my student screen that I now have 4 subjects in my teaching data. So now our student data is complete. We've got our year group. So we've got the student information, we've got the prior attainment for the students, that sort of fundamental start point, and we've got our 4 teaching data subjects. So now you are ready to start adding monitoring data. So we've got the year group set up, and now we can start adding in some data for those grades for the subjects that we just imported in the teaching data. Now, for monitoring, we don't actually have a report definition for this. If you use SIMS, you can import a SIMS mark sheet, or if you don't use SIMS, then there are a couple of different formats that you can import data in, and I will go through those with you. So if we select a student group here, I want to import a monitoring point for my year 13. And this can be renamed. So if, for instance, you wanted to call it judgment, I'm just going to call it judge. The name of the monitoring point does have to be 12 characters or less. And that is just for the sort of essentially the appearance in Connect Interactive, just so that all of the tables and things are nice and clear. And that is the name that my colleagues will see in Connect Interactive, and you can always edit this at a later date. So if I click on Next, again, I get a little prepared data screen. And we do have templates here of the 2 different formats in which you can import data. So if I click on Next, we'll get little pictures of those. So one is a rows per exam result. So that's sort of each student subject is on a different row. Or we can import data in a mark sheet, so where your subjects are running across the top. And I have these 2 formats in Excel as well. So here you can see that for my student, there are sort of multiple lines, one for each of their subjects, and this is the row per result. And for the mark sheet, there's 1 line for each student, subjects going across the top, and again, I've just got my 4 subjects here. So I'm going to import a mark sheet today. I would say that's sort of overwhelmingly the way that our clients do that for monitoring. So again, I'm going to use Control A and Control C. Switching back to Connect Data, just make sure that I've got the mark sheet format selected, and then I can click on Next, click and Control V to paste that data in. So here I've got my little preview of my import data. And if I click on Next, it's recognized the student ID as the admission number. UPN, I can skip. Surname and forename, again, I can skip because we did already specify that in the student ID import. And forename as well, I can skip. So now all I have left is subjects. So I can click on map remaining columns as subjects. And now I can click next. Now I'm back to this subject mapping screen. So I do have to map these subjects again because while you can see my subject name is the same, I don't have that exam level column this time. So now the software sort of hasn't recognized that subject. So again, if I type in biology, And now that I've got these mapped, I can click Next. No errors, so I can continue. And again, I get this little summary of the data that's going to be imported. So now I can click Finish. And now I will be taken to the grade points screen. So once you have sort of finished all of your imports, there is this final step of publishing your grade point. So essentially what this allows you to do is once you've imported everything, you can go through, have a quick check. You know, if we wanted to just revisit that grades data that we've put in, I can click on year 13 here, and it will take me to my grades page. So now you can see here are my subjects, here are the grades that I imported. If I do need to edit any grades, then I can do so. And if you are interested in sort of how you can make edits to your data, then I would definitely recommend having a quick look at our editing data webinar. So this will show you sort of exactly how you can edit your data, sort of in bulk and individually. But once I'm happy with everything, I now just need to check and publish. Again, we have just sort of a little little check of our data here. And when you're happy with everything, click on publish, and this is going to make your information live for your users so that your colleagues can begin using Connect Interactive and all of the features in there. If you do make any edits to any students or any grades, then you will just need to remember to republish. So for example, if one of their judgment grades changed, I'll show you that again, then this student here, I can click on this edit pencil. I have my student information here. And if I click on subject information and choose my judgment grade point here, then I can edit this grade, save that. But now that I've made edits in here, I just need to remember to go back and republish that grade point. And I do get this little pop-up here that prompts me to do this. But if I go to my grade point screen, you can see now this year 13 judgment grade point that was green and live for users. It now has some pending changes. So essentially that grade change isn't going to go through to Connect Interactive until I check and publish this again. So that is essentially the minimum data that you really need. There are lots of sort of other things that the system can do. You know, you can start putting in custom columns, you know, sort of your own filters and that kind of thing. But I mean, in terms of just getting sort of the fundamental data in, the really essential data, it is, you know, for the student data import, it's your ID, the student name, UPN for Key Stage 4, that's really important. And if you're not going to use the average GCSE score calculator, then you will need to, well, I would recommend putting in the prior attainment in that student data import. For the teaching data import, again, it's the student ID, the subject they're studying, and we do feel that the teaching set is going to be really helpful, particularly at Key Stage 4. And then in terms of getting grades in, again, student ID, that fundamental bit of information, the subject they're studying, and the grade that they either have achieved if it's sort of a recently assessed piece of work, or that judgment grade that the teacher feels that they would achieve. Okay, so if I come back to the home page, Now you can see I have my Year 13 judge in here. So that is that judgment grades that I've just added. So now your colleagues, they would be able to come into to Connect, log in and access this. So the other thing that I just want to show you is how to add users in bulk. So if we come into Manage Users and Settings, here we have our users on our account, and we also have sort of an individual add user, and we have this bulk add users as well. Now, if you download this template, you can add in your user's email addresses, job titles, and name. And they will sort of be added automatically so that you don't need to go through this sort of, well, up to 250 times, essentially. And all of the users, when they're added, their default permissions will be to be able to access Interactive. They won't be able to add sort of any data, and they won't be able to manage users in here. So I would just say that if you are adding colleagues who will need to do that, then just tick that settings box and make sure they have upload permissions. Okay, so I know that was a little bit of a whirlwind tour of Connect Data, but I hope it was helpful just to sort of introduce you to the system, maybe show you how to get information in. If you do have any questions, please do use the help button in the bottom left. That will go straight through to our support team, or you can email them at support@alps.education. Or if you prefer to call us, then we are all working remotely, but we are still able to take phone calls, and we'll still be able to give you support remotely. So I will leave the webinar running just for a few minutes, just in case you have any other questions. But thank you for your time.